Okay. So I would like to call the Committee of the Whole Budgets. I am not going to talk a lot tonight. It's okay. It's only a nasal infection. So, yes, I might, yeah. I'll bogart the mic. Okay, so Council Business Planning Committee of the Whole Budget meeting of November the 15th. We have all members of Council present and a full complement of staff this evening. We have no delegations, no correspondence, so let's get right in. Oh, are there any declarations of interest this evening? I know you're in. That's not that crazy juice, is it? That's bad. Okay, so at this time, I would like to turn it over to the Chief Administrative Officer. Councillor Renjima.
Thank you, Chair Patriva. I do have an interest to declare, I think. I have a question, I think, first, through to the Director of Public Works. In the capital budget, I will have an interest to declare connected to my employment regarding the works that are supposed to happen in Jordan. I don't know if there's anything tonight that would apply to that. Connected to Phelps Homes.
Mr. Graham?
Thank you. Through Mr. Chairman, I don't believe there would be. That's a capital budget item.
Yeah.
I believe tonight is operating.
Operating.
Okay, thanks. Just thought about that last minute, so thanks very much.
Okay. So at this time, I will turn the meeting over to the Chief Administrative Officer and the Director of Finance and Administration to provide a presentation to assist us in the guidance of our 2018 operating budget deliberations this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to provide some opening comments and then go right into the presentation. I did want to start by highlighting that tonight's budget, I believe, has been well prepared for council consideration. Our senior management team has worked tirelessly, I think, responding to what we've heard from council and the community, and so hopefully that is what you see before you. We've looked at the balance of affordability and service delivery levels, and we think that is getting better. And again, hopefully as we go through this budget, those will be themes that come forward. We still need to invest in the basics, and again, that'll be something you hear from us. I did want to say that this term of council has been clear and has demonstrated that you're thinking beyond just one term. You're looking at sustainability, you're looking at long-term decisions, you're looking at infrastructure levies, and you're looking at those sorts of things. So staff have prepared a budget that we believe is an appropriate budget that meets both service and staff expectations at this particular time. I will reiterate, though, we're still not there, and as we continue to look at budgets and we look at items like multi-year budgeting and where we're going over next term and the strategic planning that needs to go along with that, we will continue to recommend to council where we need to invest and where we believe you need to invest in terms of our people and our services so we can continue to be a leading municipality. Other municipalities use different budget approaches. You've probably read that in the paper lately. Some take that blue sky approach with budgets, and oftentimes that does result in a prolonged deliberation. Tonight, what our teams brought forward is something that we believe that we believe is both a thoughtful, deliberate, and balanced budget. So I will take you through the introductions, and then Angela will share with you some of the detailed department items, and then the departments and the directors are here to answer any more detailed questions. So the agenda, we're going to share with you some operating budget pressures, 2018 budget considerations, an introduction to departmental budgets. We'd then like to hear from council in terms of your thoughts and what you want us to bring back to you, and then next steps. So what is the intent of tonight's presentation? This is really your first preview into the operating budget. We will be in front of you 3 more times. 1 more time before the end of November, and then 2 times in December as we head into the approval of the final budget. What we've heard from council regarding what you want to see. So You'll see once again that this budget is presented differently, I think, than where we were in previous years. We continue to try to tweak the process. We look at best practices. We look at what others are doing in terms of how do we share the appropriate detail and the appropriate topics, how we bundle things together in terms of focus areas that align to where council wants to be, the decision-making that goes into it, high-level input, and of course, transparency and accountability. You'll see pressures, and we'll talk a little bit about the pressures and what's driving some of the increases in the departments. And I did want to highlight from a budget planning perspective, this is and will continue to be a year-round process. This year we started in May, providing budget information to council. So we've been in front of you almost 2/3 of the year in terms of talking budget, talking about outlook, talking about what needs to happen as we move forward. And of course, council input, alignment to your priorities that you've set at the beginning of this particular term, alignment to goals, and the associated outcomes. So strategic budgeting and alignment. I think we always need to start with vision, and this year specifically, we've co-created a collective vision. I've highlighted it there for you: a place to grow, a place to prosper, and a place to belong. And I think it's important that we align our work plans to that vision, and so you're going to see more of that as we move forward as well. You're also going to see alignment to council's priorities, a focus on the resident and customer service and service excellence, the importance of communicating, continued communication, which in a lot of ways ties back to transparency, the right information for both residents and for you as council to make informed decisions. I can tell you I continue to meet with residents in the community, Murray Clough, Mr. Jansen, others that have appeared before you on numerous occasions to talk about budget, to hear their comments, their concerns. Mr. Clough absolutely shared with me how complicated it is to read our budget process and to read our budget documents, and had some suggestions, again, in terms of how we make it a little more clear, a little more easy to understand. And we need to be a culture of continuous improvement. You know, we need to look at outcomes. We need to make informed and evidence-based decisions. So we've shared this slide with you before, but what's an operating budget? It pays for the day-to-day activities of the corporations, and some examples of what you see in an operating budget are salaries and benefits, insurance, supplies, fuel, utilities, and professional services. You'll see in our budget that salaries and benefits probably accounts for about 40% of the budget. In a lot of municipalities, that is significantly higher, and I'll talk to why that is, should council have any further questions on that. So the distribution of taxes, the town of Lincoln accounts for a little under 36%, the region a little over 46%, and then the remaining split between education and regional waste at 14.2 and 3.7 respectively. This is also another slide you've seen, and I think it just demonstrates where do tax dollars go. And when you look at the top two items in terms of where our tax dollars go, they are police services and education, followed by town roads and sidewalks. The green are the town services, as you see there. And so this is just a highlight for you of where tax dollars go and what are the priority areas that take up most of the tax dollar. So 2018 operating budget pressures. Again, these are some things we've shared with you in the past in terms of pressures. The first one I want to bring your attention to is maintaining service delivery levels. So the human capital piece specifically. We're constantly looking at and examining staffing levels. We have an aging workforce, which makes completing projects challenging at times. We have what you're very well aware of, and we know as well, is that seasonal changeover of staff. And so we're trying to use staff as efficiently as possible. With hockey season going later, and sometimes weather and the climate change, meaning grass and other things are happening a lot earlier in the season, there is often that seasonal change that we need to accommodate for, and you'll see in a lot of cases in our salary and wage lines how we've made that accommodation. We've got a lot of one-person departments where people are wearing multiple hats, and so we're always cognizant of that in terms of priority setting, in terms of how do we complete the work that's required. So we continue to examine the changing and increasing statutory requirements as well, both for recording, records management, and legislation also drives, and you'll see in this particular budget, and it's received a lot of media attention, the statutory obligations, whether they be Bill 148 or others, are driving a lot of this year's impacts, not only here in Lincoln, but across Niagara and across the province. Maintaining service delivery levels. And so here, this is, again, we've shared with you community growth. We're a growing community. We're an evolving community. And so there's always the balance with increasing service demands and customer expectations. Not too long ago, we shared information with you in terms of where our building permits are this year versus last year, and you're seeing a 60% increase alone in that particular area. We need to maintain facilities and make the necessary investments in those. Recreational programming. We are seeing incredible success in a lot of our programs. People want to register for those programs. So again, we need to look at how we deliver those services in a cost-effective way, and at the same time, meeting the demands that we have out there in the community. Community events and places to connect. More and more people are wanting us to partake and to be involved in festivals and partnerships, whether that be the Rotary, whether that be other organizations. We continue to see that positive effort, I think, of once you do it once, twice, and there's a success with that. I think, people want more of those types of things happening in the community. Public transit. It's a new budget item. It's something that's received a lot of attention. You're seeing a lot of municipalities focus on transit, and I think as this council has said clearly, transit's something we want to try, we want to dip our toe into. We've taken a very incremental approach, but it is still a budget pressure. It is still a pressure for our staff from an operations perspective. So on top of the day-to-day work and the other items we're doing, we're also now in a lot of ways running a public transit system. Ongoing beautification, we heard in our survey, we heard from council, we heard from the community wanting to continue to do that. So investing in the basics as well when we look at community growth. We still need to do the basic things that people want. As I highlighted earlier, there's the changing legislation and regulatory implications. Bill 148, the Better Jobs Act, which really focuses on minimum wage and equal pay, and we're seeing hundreds of thousands of dollars in increase in our budget as it relates to pay equity and equal pay. And again, nothing that is exclusive to just Lincoln, but something everybody's experiencing right now. The municipal elections legislation, so some regional changes. Again, those are things that we're going to need to prepare for. We're going to need to make sure that we're advocating as much as we can with the region to make sure if there are dollars to be had for those increased costs, that we're doing that. And there's just the implementation of a variety of new policy initiatives, a lot of them this year and into 2018 that you'll hear more about. So the Code of Conduct exercise, council went through the need to appoint an integrity commissioner and those sorts of things. Long-term financial sustainability, ongoing municipal need to identify sustainable revenue sources. Again, something that I know Chair Pachuriva and others on council have hammered the point through. Need to grow revenue at the same rate as increased demand for service and programming. So how are we looking at it? Revenue? How are we looking at different ways to bring money into the municipality? We have a very limited ability to do that, so we need to get creative. We need to figure out how we're looking at revenue. There's increases to costs across the province, so we're seeing inflationary increases around construction and so forth. And of course, there's what we've heard loud and clear, both from council and the community at various times, balancing affordability for residents. So what are those needs and wants? I always quote Councillor Foster on that in terms of, how do we look at what's necessary and what can possibly be deferred. We've got an economic development strategy that we'll be embarking upon to address that need to shift residential tax base to industrial commercial. That isn't an easy undertaking. It's not an easy task. We need to look at our employment land use and make sure we've got enough employment lands. Value-added growth, that's where we have an opportunity. We are an agricultural-based community. While we are one of the most diverse in Niagara region, The value-added piece, if I think about what Bench is doing, I think about what's happening at Redstone or otherwise. They're paying full pop in terms of taxes on those particular pieces, but there is a value-added piece. And of course, the attraction of both new, and I know we continue to suggest that it's not just the new business we're trying to attract, but growing existing business. That's where most of your growth and most of your opportunity lies. So just generally around resources, prioritization, studies and plans, I don't think it's a surprise to council, this first comment. It's something you've heard me say. We are a lean organization, so we need to best plan for and use resources for the most community impact. So we continue to talk to council about prioritization and what needs to happen first. We look at our 2018 work plan, and we will be having that prioritization discussion as a team, and then coming forward to council as we move into 2018. Our projects are becoming more complex. There's a lot of a need for us to look at cross-departmental resources. Do we require special skill sets? Is there an external expertise that's needed? And so I think as we look to 2018 and beyond, those are things that you're going to hear more about. Currently, we have 81 projects on our list, and those are corporate projects, whether they be BDSS, whether they be our own site rationalization, whether they be transit, the DC study, future focus, work plan action items to be completed, major projects to be built, and just the capital items, the 34 of them, tentatively that council has given a draft, at least okay to move forward with. So all things we're looking at as we go into 2018. So the 2018 proposed budget, a slight overview here for council. Again, this is information that you're aware of. Our staff complement, 262, the majority of those being our volunteer firefighters, followed by our part-time staff, and then library and full-time employees. A total proposed operating and capital budget of $41 million. Again, probably a little bit less than we have in previous years. We were very selective, I think, in terms of what could be completed in 2018. And so our capital list is smaller. We're spending time making sure we've got the appropriate plans in place before we start building versus the other way around. And so while that 41 may be a little bit less, we believe it's an appropriate number in terms of what we need to accomplish next year. And your total replacement asset value, I think as we shared at the last meeting, just puts into context the value of the assets we have, totaling a little under $500 million. So a little bit of a historical overview, again, something I shared with you at the last meeting. Since 2006, we've averaged approximately a 4.01% tax increase in the community. So what does that say? I often look at this kind of retrospective information to say, what's it telling us and how does it prepare us for moving forward? So growth and development has continued to grow, and the budget increases have maintained the current operating needs. I think that is a good, sound policy. If you look back, 2008, there was a global economic crisis. So I think at times we need to react to the situations around us. It has, though, as we've gotten out of that economic crisis and moved into the latter parts of this decade, limited accommodation for growth and development. And so this council has made increases last year. You've made increases the year before that are slightly above that 4% average. And I think that, as I said earlier, demonstrates that you've got that long-term community vision that is required versus just looking at by term. I've always said the next 3 to 5 years, I think in Lincoln's trajectory and Lincoln's evolution are ones that this council has already made decisions on, but will continue to make decisions that are generational in nature. So this year, the budget proposed is a continued investment looking at services, including the special infrastructure levy. So what's new this year? Again, looking at this, it looks different than probably what you had last year and definitely different than what you've had in years past. There's expenditure categories. So again, this is an effort to keep the broader context, not the details as we heard from council at the last meeting. We are looking at budget trend analysis for each department, an overall budget snapshot for each department, including the funding sources, So you'll see that categorizing allows council to observe consolidated versus line by line, showing where the budget changes and investments are occurring. We've got a restated category that talks about operational adjustments throughout the budget year. And we've got the interfunctional piece that I think always caused a little bit of confusion has been revised. That is that chargeback for water, wastewater, and building. And so we've removed that internal back and forth that happens and tried to make the documents clearer to understand. Again, both things that I would tell you we've heard, in the community when people are talking to us about how do we read these documents, as well as what we believe we've heard from council. So the expenditure categories in the budget books, this explains a little bit about what each of those categories is comprised of. The salaries, wages, and benefits, very clear. And this is where you likely see most of the increases in terms of the departments. And the reason for that, and we can get into that, is really things around the accommodations for Bill 148, the progression through our wage grids. There are certain collective agreement obligations that we have in those. They're the operational items, the number of hours, and so forth. Operational service and supplies are things like chemical supplies, medical waste management supplies, and the purchase services. Administrative is audit, advertising, consulting, insurance, training, and those sorts of related expenses, office supplies as well. Utilities, fairly self-explanatory. Equipment, vehicles, and technology. On the operating side, that is the cost of repair and maintenance on vehicles, the kind of minor purchases that need to happen. Financial expenditure, these are those external agencies receiving subsidies, as well as what we call our tax write-offs, and Angela can speak more to those if you have any questions. And of course, long-term debt charges. So you'll recall we gave you a slide like this last year as well, where we talked about what are the budget factors that are both within control and what we call kind of uncontrollable. And I shared some of those earlier. The 1.5% negotiated collective agreement in terms of salary adjustments, the wage progression through the grid, those are things that, again, are worked into contractual obligations. The inflationary increases that are happening. We've shared with you the 2017 inflation, as well as the projected one for 2018, hovering around that 2.5%. And just the cost of construction. We're seeing that. We're seeing bids, tenders. We are looking at innovative ways to address that, whether that be trying to get out earlier, whether that be bundling things together, and you're going to see more of that. And of course, the utility increases, totaling approximately $41,000. What's within control? That is the service levels, professional services, things like consulting, and material items. So you'll see that, and you'll hear from us that whether it be parks, cemeteries, beautifications, we've made the necessary increases. We did that on the capital side around cemeteries, and we're doing that here in order to address those service levels and what we're hearing in terms of areas of focus. So the current landscape, again, it is constant. We've got year-long communication and outreach, and this does happen. I highlighted some one-on-one meetings we've had, but we continue to reach out and listen to people via surveys. Council is sharing that information. Social media, we're always talking about budget. The media is here today, and the media does a good job of getting this information out there. And we often get reaction and feedback when those stories are written. We've heard council in terms of long-term sustainability and focusing on the basics. As I highlighted earlier, that community needs versus wants piece. We're looking where we make strategic investments that leverage other funding. We've been successful, I would suggest, in the last year in terms of the partnerships, in terms of going out to the community. We've benefited from things like Canada 150 and created a lot of goodwill in the community, and we need to continue to do that. I can tell you where we're currently sitting is a little above 6% in terms of a tax increase overall. We are still finalizing the agencies, boards, and commissions, what we call the ABCs. And that information, and that needs to be presented to council, so whether that be the TVTA, BIA, and so forth. And so when we come back to you, you'll have more of that information as well. And as town departments, we're looking for efficiencies. We're cognizant and aware that where possible, we need to mitigate increases while also ensuring work is completed. So doing business differently, and we're about to get into the details here, and Angela will take over, but this is an important slide, I think, in terms of how we are doing business differently and how we are looking at the organization. Continuous quality improvement strategies, so looking to where we can identify efficiencies, looking at our workflow, expenditures, so whether that be some of the work going on in community services around lean, whether that be some of the process work that's happening in planning, around bylaw services, for example. Those are all things we continue to look at. Value for money is something that we're focused on as well, and will be focused on more as we move forward. Looking at customer service, a consistent customer satisfaction, and looking at how we interact with residents regularly who come into us and who either purchase services from us or who expect services from us by virtue of the work that we do. Looking for additional funding opportunities and partnerships. Again, we've had some success this past year with almost $1 million from CWWF. We've got a lot of grants out there that are on the table as it relates specifically to cultural programming and other areas through OSIF and so forth, and so that's going to continue. We need to set budgets and targets and make sure we look at our expenditures and revenues, something that we're going to be focused on and have been focused on. Innovation, exploring new approaches to the way we deliver service. And again, continuing to ensure a clear connection between the budget and the strategic plan. That should be and is our guiding document. It needs to continue to be our guiding document. And there's things that need to happen in the short term to facilitate success in that longer term strategic plan in terms of achieving what council wants us to do. So I'm going to turn it over to Angela, who's going to take you through the operating budget by department.
Thank you, through you. I'll be presenting the operating budget financials, and at the end, should you have any questions, the directors are here to help and answer any questions that you have. This year, as Mike had mentioned, the budget has been presented significantly different. It's high level, yes, but what it does do, it does include all that same information, but what it's doing is it's collapsing it for you and actually identifying where those variances are instead of you having to go do that line by line note identification. We've done that here for you with providing the high level. So we're just going to go through and look at the budget drivers for council. This year, councils, in your budget, you'll see increases for conferences, delegations, and trade missions. And in addition, we've also increased the advertising to support the ward meetings that councilors promoting. And that includes the advertising, printing, and the distribution of the information. So this is the snapshot that was included in your budget, and the net levy impact for council is $9,565. That is your change in 2018 over 2017. The budget for the drivers for the CAO's office. The CAO's office continues to focus on council's corporate priorities. This year, 2 services were added to communications and the economic development. Included in the CAO salary line, you'll see the executive assistant to the mayor and CAO, communications, economic development, and human resources. This year, there is an additional investment in the overall organization for communications and related functions, such as marketing, products, advertising, graphic design, and printing. Also included in the CEO's office is an allowance for trade missions, and economic development strategy and incentive programs. This is the overall budget for the CAO. Included in here, then to summarize, is the economic development, communications, and human resources, and the overall impact is $217,000. Corporate services. Corporate services will be focusing on the customer service priorities this year. They're going to be reviewing some of their service offerings, specifically like marriage licensing and maybe gaming. Key drivers this year is the election expenses. As you know, it's 2018 is the election year. And the enhanced regional chair election at large is another item that will be driving the costs. And these costs for the election are funded from the reserve. It's something we transfer annually to the budget. The overall impact for corporate and services legislative is $49,000. Finance is going to continue to work on efficiencies and accountability and transparency. This is something that we look at annually. We look at it in our day-to-day. The procurement for the FTE procurement person has been included into the proposed budget, and the business case will be brought forward next week to be shared with council on the 21st. And keeping up with technology and investments have been made in the processes to improve efficiencies, redundancies, and resiliency. To keep up with these demands that the IT department is facing, we've actually transitioned an IT co-op position into a full year-round desktop analyst to help with support for IT. And the overall drivers there, or the total for the drivers, is $220,000. This one is general government. It's not necessarily part of part of finance, but finance oversees it. We've just shown it differently because these are really things that are to the town in general. So like the grants for example, is not specific to any department, or the fees and charges. This is where taxes would land as well. So we've just wanted to show this separate from the other budget lines. And then this is just having a reduction of $6,000 in total. So for fire, rescue, and emergency services, the strategic focus is moving forward will be on the needs of the department and the fire stations going forward. Driving the cost in this department is the need to increase the reserve funds over the next 10 years to address the 10-year capital plan needs. And this budget has increased $51,000 in total. Public Works will continue to focus on transportation priority areas, specifically the U-Link pilot project. Public Works has seen several increases in utility costs, repairs and maintenance, and material costs, just with the economic conditions going on in the economy. They've also experienced increases in wages due to grid changes, part-time positions to provide basic services. And they've also been impacted by the equal pay for equal work. They have several part-time people who will be, if you recall that report that was brought forward to council, there was a $180,000 impact to the budget, and this department is being impacted by that. So this budget has been reduced by $156,000. There was a savings there in debt charges, sorry. Community services. Services will focus on to align their user, Community services focus is to align with user and community needs. The strategic plan specifically highlighted customer service, cultural planning, and how community services ties into economic development for the town. This being achieved through increased programming, enhanced customer service, following council's request to invest in the basics, materials, and beautification. Salaries and wages have been impacted through the grid progression, moving new hires from 2017 to a full year budget, impacts for equal pay legislation, and increase for hours and coverage. So again, they're being impacted by those same things. Internally transferred the admin assistant from corporate services into community services, as well as another line item. So their overall impact is $342,000 to the budget. Planning. Planning will continue to focus on growth areas, wage adjustments, progressions through the grids, and increased hours for basic services. And their overall, they've had a lot of increase in their revenues, but they have an overall impact of $205,000. And finally, the library, and Jill is here to answer any questions that you may have. Their total impact is $85,000 to the budget.
So just to, I think, conclude the comments and then turn it over to council, both for input in terms of what you want to see moving forward, as well as any questions you may have today that we can answer in terms of this high-level overview. What you're going to see, and I think what you've seen, is that we've also tried to make some accommodations around learning and development and that investment. There's some small increases that have been worked into the budget, totaling approximately $20,000. Not a lot when you look at $2,000 or $3,000 per the department in order to do that work. I think what we want to do first, before we make any of those accommodations, and I know that was brought up at the last meeting when we introduced the operating budget, briefly develop a plan in 2018 and what that looks like, and come back to you as we head into the 2019 budget on that particular item. We do see an additional ask coming from the TVTA of $10,000 in addition to their base budget. And so again, these are other items that we just want council to be cognizant of. The Beamsville BIA, that was a multi-year commitment, and staff are working very closely and diligently with the BIA to look at long-term sustainability, to look at how that model's delivered. Those are similar conversations we're having with the TVTA as well, and both Councillor Timmers and I can answer any of those questions. But looking at how do we deal with our external agencies that provide work, we will be working and collaborating with the BIA on the executive director work plan and both those BIA and tourism functions that are required. And again, I did want to highlight, we heard last year the importance of procurement, of the role that procurement would play moving forward in terms of how we're procuring services across the organization, where we can maybe find some efficiencies. And so you're seeing that within the finance budget, and that is a new function within the organization. So I did want to, as we close out, just, I think, share with you some other budget items for consideration moving forward. These are things beyond 2018, they're 2019 considerations, but things that we still need to do. We need to do an assessment, I think, of our general labor workforce. We need to look at our frontline, the part-time complement versus full-time complement versus efficiencies. We need to continue to look at service delivery and planning, both from a frontline perspective as well as at other levels in the organization. We need to continue to look at technology and the needs there, both efficiencies and, I think, as we heard loud and clear, the implementation of existing systems, things that we've purchased, things that council's made an investment in, continuing in the follow through on those sorts of things. Customer service and a specific focus on a customer service strategy. I think these are things, again, you're going to hear as we get into 18, but beyond that into 19. Support services, kind of a strategic look at the needs in terms of those strategic resources in the organization and what they do as the work that we deliver becomes more complex. Succession planning, and just a continued look at competitiveness, salaries, benefits, those sorts of things. And I think that goes across the board, whether that be council, whether that be the non-union management, or whether that be our frontline staff. So again, here is a copy, and here's a little bit of a budget timeline for you. We are at 2 of 5 there, and we will be before you again on the 21st next week, presenting a continuation of the operating budget as well as the water and wastewater rates budget overview. So next steps, as I said, we're going to be in front of you next week with some information. Our goal is to come back and to share with you some more scenarios, hear what council has to say today in terms of what you want to see, and look at our regional assumptions, the 2% from the region, what that means in terms of, again, various scenarios and the blended rate. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
For accommodating my request to speak to council. I'm very, very interested in hearing how everyone is going to be responding to this budget. Mr. Chairman, the process that we all came into in 2014 has certainly evolved from that first meeting, literally, where there were green papers flying around the room for capital. And also, we have, throughout the last 3 years, checked ourselves on a number of occasions in regard to our inordinate focus on details. And these details, I think we all agree, they end up representing a major distraction to council in our setting, because we haven't done such a good job of setting goals, and we haven't agreed on a general work plan. We agree that we would, and we have set expectations, and that we would hold the CAO and staff to them. And where that detail counts is in how we make decisions and to the effectiveness of our communication so that Lincoln's citizens understand how these decisions relate to the strategic plan. And it's a plan that they contributed heavily to. We have many, many years in Lincoln, and I believe this is a very commendable historical perspective of consistent investment. And yet, there are times when we are challenging ourselves around things like the standards that relate to the fire department and what the efficacy of those is at this time, particularly when there are so many challenges. The life cycle process is another one. And we also face the need to ensure that water quality is maintained at a very high level, and we're very clear on what the outcome is going to be. But I ask Council, who owns the standards? Because I think between the last meeting and this meeting, my epiphany is that those standards are owned by those who carry the risk at the departmental level. We move away from struggling with that efficacy in certain scenarios, and the staff need to demonstrate the management of them. So when the scenario comes forward at the budget that we need this and this and this because of these standards, fine, thank you very much. I believe our response should be to determine what our level of affordability can be, and then the experts take the standards and they say, this is how the standards can be applied. They can identify risk for us, but they need to apply the standards. To me, that would make a good deal more sense. Otherwise, it becomes a very emotional decision. Fire department's not the only one. You start making emotional decisions based on things that you can't control. And in any other discipline, if you had professional standards that you had to adhere to, you do not work in an ideal environment. You never have enough budget, but it is up to you to apply those standards in the most effective way, and you will be held accountable for that. So as a council, we need to respond with a level of affordability, and then staff will manage that. Our goal is to establish a level of investment based on what level of service we think citizens of Lincoln want. And we know that the citizens of Lincoln are highly engaged, and that is to our benefit. Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased to see that the ABCs are being separated out because we do need to make decisions not only about how much we want to apply to each of those, but in some cases we may want different modeling. And in the next meeting, I'm hoping, Mr. Chairman, that the CAO will present alternate models if they are available. I want to remind Council that we are, as Council, are the board. We are the executive arm of the corporation. We are responsible for a $50 million budget. Historically, there has never been anything in this budget to support the board. So I'm taking a very hard line on this, and I had a conversation with the CAO because I believe that it is the responsibility of the CAO to find that support in the current budget. And as we mature and we know more clearly what our responsibilities are and what we need as resources, then we can see that maturity growth by small increments year over year to ensure that we have the support that we need. And some of those things are in relation to sustainability, the sustainability research program, so we can find resources in different places, and we will work with the CAO in that regard. I will repeat my concern in 2018 in corporate and legislative services and the loss of productivity because of the historical focus on the statutory responsibility for election. This is not a slight on the staff, it's just the way it's been. It's my personal belief. I'm not prepared to accept that diminished activity. So my question to the CAO is, and I'll wait now while he answers it, what is the source to augment that loss? Is there money coming from the province? Because I would strongly suggest that a slowdown for a year in this climate and what we have in terms of expectations is no longer acceptable. it may have been acceptable in the past, and I'm saying as the mayor, it is not acceptable that we eat this every year by everything slowing down. So, Mr. Chairman, through you, I would ask the CAO for his response to that question.
Through Mr. Chairman, to the mayor, and specifically around corporate and legislative services, as everyone is aware, we are short-staffed in that particular department. We are looking at recruitment, and I think we're looking at, when we bring new staff on, making sure that they have the skill set to both manage internal needs and manage external needs. I know Mr. Kalasa is looking at a temporary student to assist with some of the prep work that needs to happen, some of the very, what I'm going to call basic work, important work, but basic work that needs to go into elections and planning and so forth. I know both as CAOs and I know as clerks, there is an advocacy movement, for lack of a better word, as it relates to ensuring that the region assists with any funds. Because now we're going to be electing a regional chair at large, and there are increased costs. We are looking at specifically how that occurs. Is it on the same ballot? Is it a separate ballot? Which I think will dictate the type of investment we receive from the region, if any. So, I mean, those are, I think, some of the preliminary comments, Mayor Easton, that I provide to that particular item. But I mean, I think we're well aware of the level of support and the level of legislative support that council thinks is appropriate and that we believe is appropriate, and I assure you that will continue in 2018.
Thank you very much. And through you, Mr. Chairman, one of the other things that I think that in all services, private, public sector, you always expect that a certain amount of resources will be available in each of the departments, because there are overlaps of responsibilities. And so I will also be looking for a willingness in all departments, as there is now, and as that increases, when it increases, that staff will respond. And it's particularly important, and I see this every day in terms of, well, it's really all of the departments, but the willingness needs to be there. Mr. Chairman, I want to speak to what happens, what I believe happens, what my experience is when the budgets get tight. And they never get tighter than they are in an election year. And I have sat on council when there's indiscriminate pillaging that goes on from one department to another. And so I'm looking for balance. We do need to make there needs to be a really serious look in certain areas. We're all aware of that. I'm looking for balance. I'm concerned that we begin to cherry pick, and that we do that in a way that diminishes the integrity of the commendable plan that we have been executing. And I believe that there has been a very high level of discipline, which I think that if we apply that in these circumstances where we all have a lot of questions, we will best defend our positions going forward. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I reserve my ability to speak at the end. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Mayor, for those comments. 3 words that you said that keep going around and around in my brain, and that is level of affordability. And at this point, if we're looking at a budget that is a 6+ increase, I believe that is above the level of affordability. And there are 2 ways I think that can be changed. And obviously is to reduce the budget and less expenditures, or increase revenue to bring that level down. In order to look at any one of those, one of the things that we've done in other years is looked at like a 1%, and what is the dollar equivalent to 1%, so that if there is a 1% increase or decrease in that level of affordability, or that 6.6+, whether that's those number of dollars increased revenues that we can find or reductions that we can find.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, Councillor McMillan, to answer your question, 142,000 equates to 1% in terms of our budget right now. Correct. 140.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am looking for a balanced situation as well, but we're also having, I'm seeing a shift to a more outcome-based plan of attack, and certainly in the budgeting. We've set some pretty high expectations as council as to what we want to achieve. And, you know, as Councillor McMillan was saying, the revenues either have to be there or we have to find somewhere to make it affordable for the citizenry. Certainly, I'd like to see an emphasis put on looking at a strategy for the bylaw zoning sort of area with regards to helping shift from a residential heavily weighted residential tax contribution to a more commercial tax-based contribution, which I know will come from an economic development standpoint, but it'll also come from us making sure that folks that are doing business appropriately with the proper zoning and the proper, and they're paying their fair share. So I think that's a very important strategy we need to look at, because I think there's revenue there that is being missed. So anyway, I was pleased to see that the CAO mentioned implementation of the technology, making sure we're following up on what we've invested good money in, and having the metrics and the results of that expenditure come back to council as being clear. So thank you, Mr. Chair, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a whole sequence of random notes here based on what Mr. Kirkopoulos has provided to us, as well as some of the other comments that we've been hearing. So I'm going to start out by basically stating, you know, one of the things that makes us unique as, I guess, the people that make up the board in a political environment is that we are political. In other words, we are elected. We are here based on what the community has stated at one point in time, and we are the ones that are here to make the best decisions for the community. So, you know, that makes us a little bit unique when it comes to board positions, I guess, if you want to put it that way. The discussion that you went through concerning operations and the need to grow revenue, et cetera, within it, fascinating discussion. We could probably sit here and argue for days on what government is all about. I've done many an essay with my political science degrees, as well as other, on things like new public management and how the expectation is for the customer service side of things versus the way that, you know, we want to look in the community about revenues and things like this. But unfortunately for being in government or with what we're doing, a heck of a lot of the stuff that we do, we wouldn't do if we were a private corporation. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. Why would we send trucks out to do snow? I mean, it makes absolutely no sense. We gain no revenue from it. It's just a complete type of thing. So, you know, so there's things like that when we're looking at it, it makes it sort of more interesting when we're involved with this types of thing. We do have a $41 million budget coming in this year, which is sort of pretty much consistent with what we've seen. I want to make mention to the fact that we'll come back. Hopefully the mayor can explain this a little bit further, but some discussion about indiscriminate moving around from department to department. I personally haven't seen that, but what I will say is that we have had a high level of discipline when it comes to budgets within this municipality for a long time. You know, this council that's here right now just didn't suddenly discover, you know, how to do budgets. I mean, there were some very strong financial rules and considerations put into play as we came into this particular council. And I'll tell you is that with that, you know, the books were in absolutely excellent shape coming into this, and it's provided us the opportunity to go and do a number of things that we're now able to do. You know, we have seen a significant increase in administrative help within this particular term of council. Is it long overdue? Yeah, I think we made a mistake over the years by not increasing in the areas of like communication, you know, going down the road with economic development, you know, and a variety of other things like this. And an admin assistant for the mayor and the CAO, good Lord, that should have been there a long time ago, okay? So a lot of these things are good, and I think we're at a stage where we're understanding these are solid things to put in place. I think we have to remember, all of us who are on this council, that we're part-time positions. All of us are. The mayor is as well. Like, it's the simple reality is that we're part-time. So what does that really mean? What type of assistance do we need within that framework type of thing? Have we got enough? Do we not have enough? I'm really, I don't know, I don't really have a strong enough opinion yet. I happen to think we have enough, but again, that's just one opinion amongst 9. And which brings me to the procurement coming in. I will look forward to seeing what the business case is. I'm hoping to see that instead of this being a net new, that there's actually going to be resources found, or there could be some changes made within the organization as it currently exists. You know, part of the discussion in the budget last year was that, you know, there's a whole series of net new that we were coming into play and that we weren't going to be seeing any more of that. So again, a little bit surprised seeing that coming onto the table. I have questions on specific areas, but I don't know, Mr. Chair, if we want to really dig into any of the weeds tonight. I don't suppose so. We wait for the next meeting on that, or do you want?
Well, Councillor, like if you've got questions that data or information can be brought back to the next meeting to shed some light on it. Yeah. I think that makes sense. So that's much like the capital, where we ask questions, and then for the next meeting, this gives staff roughly a week to do their due diligence and come back with that info.
Sure. Okay. And that's fine. I'll let others speak, and then we'll come back around to me as well. Okay. But I do want to sort of say that, you know, this whole TVTA and BIA and the increase in expenses that we're looking in that area, I think we as a council need to take a step back and look at what's going on with the whole tourism side of things. I think, to be perfectly frank, I didn't like the fact that we gave extra money to the BIA last year. I'm still ill at ease with that as we go into this year, if that's going to be the ask. But it's only because I don't think we have a real proper game plan for this. I don't even think even our monies that we're putting into the TVTA at this point, you know, I don't know if we're really gaining the value for the money that we think we're gaining putting into that. Are we meeting the needs that originally we had with our investment in the TVTA? I don't know. I think that's the type of thing that I'd like to hear from staff and see whether or not, you know, the benefits and stuff like that we've got are really there. And it's nothing against TVTA. I love the organization. I think they do terrific things, but is it really meeting the needs of what our municipality really needs as we're going on? So, and I think, you know, looking at over 6% as a tax increase, I think we owe it to ourselves to really be looking at some of these things and making sure that, you know, we're doing what we should be doing with that. So, anyway, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think just briefly to touch on the TVTA piece, and I did probably highlight it incredibly quickly during the presentation, but I know I've been approached by members of the board and the executive committee to have a very, I think, robust conversation on what the long-term, I think, plan is regarding the TVTA and that tourism offering, and is the current model with an arm's length organization the best model in terms of how we fund that, how it's resourced, and the potential revenue and sponsorship opportunities that are presented as a result of having a group like that. So definitely something that you'll hear a lot more about, I think, as we go into 2018 from both Councillor Timmers, who's the council representative on that committee, but I've shared, I think, with a number of councillors that members of the executive have definitely approached me about sitting down and just having that conversation, knowing that the current model probably needs to be looked at.
And I guess it's kind of a good time. I'll jump in now and follow on Councillor Foster's questions. I don't see any more hands. It is a follow-up on those ABCs. You know, looking at the 20 Valley and looking at, you know, other municipalities and how they're doing things. Niagara-on-the-Lake is faced with a 7% tax increase. They're having a special meeting. So it's looking outside of the box. So, you know what, one of their things is, and I think it's time too for these ABCs to start helping themselves. So, room nights, what would a DMF generate? What kind of funding would that calculate? You know, there was an increase last year in membership fees that we weren't aware of, so there was $1,000 going from the town to the TVTA. So there's money there. There's also the other municipal partners that there's funds out there that you need to deal with. There's also the internal workings of the organization. You know, the winery committee is flush in money, but the association isn't, and Jordan Village isn't. So you've got to look at events. If you're putting on events for the entire association, the association should take the benefits of those events and at the same time the liability of those events. So it shouldn't be certain groups within the organization to benefit and profit. It should be one for all and all for one, if that's what you're going to do. Having been the former council rep on the BIA and Councillor Foster, you were there as well. There's some internal plans there. They have been in place for associate memberships. There's been a constant movement to try to increase the BIA boundaries and the revenue. An $8,000 levy is not sustainable. Those are $1,980. We're in 2016. We need to have that conversation. How are those boundaries expanded? How is the revenue garnered? And plus, you know, when you're only contributing $35 a year, you really have no skin in the game. You want to be an equal partner, you need to put skin in the game. And it can't be a handout constantly to the municipality. Help yourself, right? And then, you know, that goes to with you know, a follow-up on technology. And I challenge, and again, a question through to our presenters tonight, were the departments given some targets? Like, was it okay, we'd like you to each come in at a 2% rate, or were, you know, it was just come to us with your best fits and then we'll put those all together? Because like Councillor McMillan said, 6%, it's not affordable. So we need to find some efficiencies within those departments. Community service, looking at almost a 3% increase, yet with a decline in revenues. So we go back to the budgeting process that we did, the 3-year cycle. If you have increased wages, salaries, and benefits, at the same time you should be coming to us with increases in your fees. And how do you offset those? I understand that there's you know, legislated increases. Well, you know what, then we need to have some type of target and plan to offset those if that service delivery should continue. So it's those things, and too, from a technology standpoint, and I would challenge all of the departments too to look at it. We've got to stop doing things because this is the way we've always done them. You see these pressures on wages and you see these pressures on benefits, and that we need to embrace technology. Will a machine do the job quicker and at a better rate than a person or a group of 6 people or a group of 8 people, and strive for that efficiency. So I would challenge the department to come up with an efficiency-based coefficient of 0.5% or something. But think outside the box. Come to us next week with something innovative to say, okay, I need this increase, but this is what I'm going to do going forward. You know, that's how business works. You know, you come at budget time and you've got some increases. You need to offset them with revenues. And we have to start treating this like it's our money. And I know it's easy because things are life cycle costed. But you know what? There's only one taxpayer, and that taxpayer only has one pocket. And it doesn't matter if it's our money or the region's money or the school board's money. There's not a money tree out back we can go and shake and get it to produce more. So it's kind of at a crossroads. And you know, those are the things that I would like to see, you know, for the next meeting. Some of those potential revenue streams that are out there that we haven't looked at. And I'm probably done. Oh, Mr.
I'm not sure who's worse, Mr. Chair, but so through you, Mr. Chairman, I think to some of your points, I mean, we're evolving the budget process. I know you've heard me say that before. I think as we get into next year and the years beyond, it will get better. Budget guidance, absolutely, something I think a lot of us are used to in terms of, you know, that budget guidance that is given, that is set, and then departments work towards. I think in a lot of ways, you've heard me say we're still playing a little bit of catch up in terms of, you know, a number of staff that you've got in place now. I think inheriting a strategic plan, inheriting some areas of focus, and looking at where we can do things differently, how we can expand on those things, and then just the ever-moving nature of how we do our work. So absolutely, I agree with you moving forward on budget guidance. Without getting into details, I can tell you, you know, we continue and have looked at our revenue projections and user fees. And I think what we need to do is when we set those user fees, make sure we meet those user fees. And I think that's a key element of what we're doing. I can tell you, you know, this senior management team is one that definitely looks at every way possible. We do treat this money, Angela, absolutely. And I think the rest of us do as well, as if it was ours. We are, you know, bringing to you, I think, as I said at the beginning, a budget that is more in line with what we need versus taking this approach that if we had everything and we could do everything, here's what it looks like. I don't necessarily agree with that philosophy of starting at 13 or 14% and then, you know, dwindling it down. And so all good comments, embracing technology. Some of the other comments that we heard. I mean, our goal is to enhance and continue to focus and look at public trust, public confidence in what we do. And so I think the suggestions we've heard around the table are good, they're important, and we will take those and I think look at both long-term sustainability of our ABCs and again, some creative ways to look at either partnerships or revenue generation.
Just one more point too, and I come back to, you know, as I'm talking about that, and some of the issues too of you know, the technology where we had you know, the GPS system. So we've got a couple years of data based on you know, snow plowing and things like that, and I'm sure it was a part of last year in the infrastructure committee where there was a report that came through wanting to analyze that GPS data, and at that point, it didn't fly, but that's where, again, like the business case needs to be made because, you know, we go back to we're running a lean organization and we don't have the time or expertise to be able to analyze that. Well, you know, a $10,000 look at that, if it translates into operational savings of $50,000, $60,000, it's that penny smart, pound foolish approach that, you know, if the business case is written and can be presented at this time, then you know, look forward to things like that. And just as an example, going back to, you know, as you're looking at this and you're thinking about reports and that came through, and you know, can come back to help. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and, you know, some very, very detailed and in-depth commentary so far. And I think we're trying to stay as high level as we can on this. You know, one of the things that I'm wondering about, and maybe for the next meeting, is, you know, we look at 6% and it's roughly $850,000. And, you know, I'd like to see where that $850,000 is. If you look at salaries, for instance, salaries, wages, and benefits as an overall category, how much of that $850 is salaries, wages, and benefits? How much is organizational services? And then I think we need to look at, you know, what's the $15 minimum wage going to cost us? And potentially, what's the procurement officer going to cost us in that 852 or I had it as 852 and 850. So try to keep this high level. Let's not get into department by department, but show that pie of here's how it breaks down, 850 grand. And then I think we can start talking about, you know, what do we want to trim, or can we trim? You know, I mean, you know, I think over these 3 years that we've been doing budgets, we've been fairly aggressive in spending right and not overspending. And yes, I know we're going into an election, but I think there's also what needs to be done, and what do we need to be brave enough to do, you know, to continue doing. You know, and if it's 4% or 4.5% that is somewhat out of our control, that it's going to happen because of provincial policy or wages, you know, that are in contracts, and then, you know, an ad here, you know, and, you know, that becomes, now we got a 1.5% to talk about. That's all we've got. So if we could have that picture of that here's the increase over last year's budget, and here's where it breaks down, I think that would be beneficial. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councillor McPherson, I think you'll recall last year, we actually had, going into this same time frame, this blue chart that effectively did that looked at what percentage is comprised that 6+%, and then gave council an idea of, in terms of those fixed costs, what are those, the add-ons, boards and agencies and so forth. So you really looked at what is town department impacts, what are those kind of other impacts that are somewhat out of our control, but in our control in terms of decision making. So we can definitely have that for you. I think Angela and her team are starting to populate that same blue chart already.
Yeah, Councillor, that's a great question, because, you know, we have come a long way in the budget deliberations. No longer do we sit here and, you know, talk about the $400 picnic tables and go around and try to slash that and talk about it for, you know, an hour and a half. And you know, that a chart like that, along with the impacts of growth, will give us a great lens to look through and see, you know, what's legislated and what's within our control to look at. So great question, Councillor. Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Pachariva. I echo Councillor McPherson. I like to see that as well, because when we look at the costs, how it's laid out, and as Mayor Easton said, we don't want to be cherry picking. I get nervous when we start looking at, let's cut this, let's cut that, and what's the implication? Like, what are we cutting? What's going to be the result of what we're cutting? And I get really nervous about that, because I know that the staff, the town, the corporation needs what it needs to accomplish what we're asking it to accomplish. So I'm a little, I don't like the 6% either, but I know that, you know, you can only go where you need to go, and we need to look at our needs versus wants. I'm gonna take on that phrase from now on, but but I want to see how far down we can go. I think we can go a little further. I like where Councillor McPherson's going. I want to see it laid out a little clearer, because I want to be very careful about what we do cut and why we cut it and where we cut it and if we can cut it. And that's kind of where I feel. So I'm looking for more information around that. And also, Councillor Foster brought this up, TVTA and BIA. I know I sit on the TVTA, but I think, like you said, we need to look at the model. But I would like to see what benefit are we truly getting and where are we going with these. I need a little more information there, just to help make a decision around how we're funding and what we're funding and why we're funding. Other than that, I look forward to the next meeting and a little more detail and keep going. But so far, I'm good. Thank you.
Councilor Brunet?
Thank you, Chair. I don't really have anything to add. It's all been great discussion. At the beginning, when Mayor Easton said her opening comments, I had a bit of a reflection at that time, but I've had a chance to sit and reflect on it for the last hour. I do believe that what she said is true in the fact that, you know, we've come a long way from 2014, and I do believe it's all about building confidence. But I do know when I look at what the role of council is, as articulated through the Municipal Act, it says that we're responsible to ensure accountability and transparency of municipal operations and maintain the financial integrity of the municipality. So I guess one could argue that if we haven't got to the confidence level, that we still need to make sure that we're putting our stamp of approval on the process. And I think we have come a long way, an awful long way. But with all the challenges that we have and the growth and everything that we're facing in the municipality, I think we need to continue to tweak this and we have these good conversations and be open and transparent with ourselves as well as the community. To Councillor Foster's comment about procurement, and I've been looking forward to procurement for a long, long time. I think I've made that comment fairly known. But I do believe that Councillor Foster's bang on, that it's not just a matter of having Angela just kind of slide it in her discussion, that it's moving into a particular department, but that it is something that we look at in terms of, okay, what is procurement going to do for us, and what are the opportunities that procurement can bring forward, and some savings. And we've been talking about this for a long time, so I hope that that's something that we can talk about, maybe not at the next meeting, but in the meeting in December. But I do believe that needs to be flushed out. We don't want to get into the weeds tonight, I guess, but I hope we, like Councillor McPherson has discussed, in areas like community services where the wages are going up $524,000, 18%. I hope we can have a good open discussion about that. And I understand it's a lot about the changes in the wages and going from full-time to part-time or part-time to full-time. But I think there needs to be some real open discussions about whether we need some of those boxes on our charts filled in 2018, or can those wait until the final quarter and maybe move it into 2019. I think those are some discussions that we need to have in some of those areas in community services, but I guess that's for a different meeting. I do believe, Councillor McMillan brings up, some great points about, the taxpayers that we have responsibilities for. But it is difficult when you look at, the increases of inflation and the introduction of all these wages. I mean, right off the bat, we've got a lot of uncontrollable increases. So it's a balancing act. There's no doubt about it, and it comes down to, what our Miss Carrie Beattie has been saying. We went out to the public to find out, where is the appetite for increase in service levels. We continue to hear about parks and beautification, and if we need to continue to meet those demands that the public keeps telling us through our communications director, those things come at a cost. So it is a balancing act, and I'm fairly happy with where we are, but the next couple of meetings will tell the tale. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I just want to go back to Councillor McPherson's point, and it's something actually the CAO and I were sort of bantied about earlier. Just for fun, I love spreadsheets, so I took the numbers and took a look at the by department salaries, and I was kind of interested in that, and it wasn't so much the fact that, there are some substantive increases in various departments, but, overall, we're going to be spending a lot more for labor this year. So I guess kind of the question to me is we're coming in even now at 6%. So to me, it means either A, there's a massive revenue increase that's expected somewhere, or B, we're cutting things somewhere. So I'm just going to be curious, maybe at our next meeting, we can focus in on that a little bit more as well, because we really need to understand, sort of the expectation. I mean, we also don't want to set you guys up to fail if it's kind of like we expect another $1 million in revenues coming in this year. Well, we got to make sure that some of those things are realistic. So. But I really like the comments from Councillor McPherson. I think that's bang on going down that road. Thank you.
Question. Mike, do we have a dollar figure for assessment growth? And how much that revenue is?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think we've got one where we are confirming that with MPAC, so we can make sure we've got that and presented similarly in that document that we're talking about coming back.
So that's not worked into this budget then yet?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, in terms of the 6, I'd have to go back and look. My understanding is that we have worked in that. Our growth projection this year is, I can tell you in terms of at least what MPAC is saying to us initially, is lower than it has been in previous years. They do anticipate a significant growth element in the 2019 budget, but they're finalizing that number. They've said it is only ever so slightly above 1% right now. So we've actually gone back to them and kind of challenged them on that. So we're waiting for that number and hope to have it for you on the 21st.
I thought it would have been an increase over last year. Okay, thank you.
I think that we've really covered some really excellent ground, and the fact that we have 3 more opportunities, you can begin to see how it needs to roll out. Mr. Chairman, my question really is, I just wanted to remind Council that, and just in terms of Councillor Foster's discussion, he is absolutely correct that we pay councillors at a part-time rate, and we expect that councillors are part-time. The Municipal Act, in terms of the role of head of council, really is quite open-ended. We are the 4th fastest growing community in Niagara, and our response requires an active head of council. So I think that that's a fair position for us to be in. So my question now, Mr. Chairman, is whether we want to wait until the next meeting, once we have all the information, or do we want to give some guidance tonight of any kind, or is part of what I heard in relation to finding capacity through efficiency the direction that we want to go? And I'd appreciate if members of council, if we could provide some more detail on that.
Actually, perhaps maybe we could ask through to the CAO what he's taken away from this at this time, and then maybe it might save us from going around and saying you're wrong, Mike, or you're right, Mike.
Through Mr. Chairman, I mean, I think to answer the mayor's question, both. I think there's I think what I'm hearing from council, go back, look at are there any efficiencies, sharpen your pen, make sure, or pencil, make sure we're looking at revenues the way that it should be. make sure we're dotting every I, crossing every T. I think all those sorts of things, and I think a lot of it will become clear when we come back with that chart and where it is. And I think we're gonna make sure with MPAC that our numbers are accurate. So I think there's a little bit of that going on. So the senior management team will get together before next week, hopefully. Start having these sorts of discussions. This is a priority, and so we're going to have to find some time to do it before the 21st so that we can come back to you with informed information and informed data. And then again, we'll be back in front of you in December as well.
I appreciate that, CAO. I think that efficiencies and increased revenues is a much, much better option than having to try to find cuts in the budget. It is just a better option altogether, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm personally not adverse to making strategic investments in spots in order to garnish some return on investment from an efficiency, a technology efficiency, or a whatever efficiency, right? I mean, certainly that's something we're going to see a payback on, not just this year, but moving forward as well. So,
Yeah,
and smart spending,
exactly,
as opposed to just throwing money at stuff.
Yeah, and I think too, this all kind of dovetails from Councillor McPherson's comment. Like, we need to see that chart to see what we have the ability to change. And then when we see that level that we have the ability to affect, what are the efficiencies that can be garnered from that? What are the revenue increases that can be garnered for that? Are there contractual obligations that maybe we can accelerate and then change the way we're doing things? Or at that point, almost the whole gamut becomes available. But, you're at that point where the public's deemed for an increase in beautification and things like that. So maybe there's ways that we can garner everything, but through that chart. Mr. CAO.
Through Mr. Chairman, great comments I think that we can take away. I did want to say, hearing a lot about efficiencies, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say we're constantly looking for efficiencies. I think, as your senior management team, I'd implore you to, and I know you do, to have trust in really in what we're doing. We are bringing you efficiencies. We are looking to figure out how we do significantly more with what I'm going to say less, if not same, in a lot of our operational areas. So we continue to look at efficiencies. The team to my side behind me continues to look at those sorts of things. But absolutely, revenue is important. I think I've said since starting, I don't see us having an expenditure problem. I see us having a revenue problem. We've tried to make some accommodations in this budget that we want to meet. We want to make sure that the targets we set, we actually meet. Otherwise it becomes more of an arbitrary exercise instead of what we think we can deliver on. So whether that be ice rates that we've seen go up significantly and that have been negotiated last year, or other things, we will see if there is any continued room and come back to you with a detailed explanation in terms of that chart and kind of the up and downs.
It's a good budget.
I'd like to give direction to come back for next meeting. No? Okay. Are there any councillor inquiries? Are there any notices of motion? Are there any announcements? Fireman or fireperson for the day on Saturday and Sunday? All right, so let's not forget about that. There are no closed session items for this evening, so I declare the meeting adjourned.